The old wooden gate creaked as David pushed it open, just like it had every evening for the past 12 years. His boots crunched softly on the fallen leaves as he walked, the familiar path that wound along Willow Creek. This was his time to think, to let the stress of the day melt away with the setting sun. David had bought this small ranch in the mountains of Colorado after his life fell apart. His wife had left him, taking their young son with her. The divorce papers still sat in his kitchen drawer, a reminder of dreams that never came true. At 45, he had learned to find peace in simple things. The sound of water rushing over, rocks, the way evening light painted the mountains gold. The quiet that came when the world settled down for the night. Tonight felt different, though. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, and something made him walk further than usual. Maybe it was the full moon casting silver shadows through the trees. Maybe it was just restlessness. Whatever it was, it led him to a bend in the creek he rarely visited. That's where he saw her dotted first. David thought his eyes were playing tricks. On him, there, sitting on a fallen log near the water's edge, was a figure in white. As he got closer, his heart began to race. It was a woman in what looked like a wedding dress, but something was terribly wrong. She was shivering violently, her arms wrapped around herself. Her long dark hair hung in wet tangles around her face. The beautiful white dress was torn and stained with mud. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and David saw fear flash in her dark eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the creek. "Please don't hurt me." David stopped walking immediately, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. He had never seen anyone look so scared, so broken. This woman needed help, and she needed it now. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently, keeping his distance. "My name is David. I live just up the path. Are you okay?" The woman tried to stand but stumbled, clearly exhausted. David could see she was in bad shape. Her lips were blue from the cold, and she could barely stop shaking. Whatever had happened to her, she had been out here for hours. "I'm so cold," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "I don't know where I am." Without thinking twice, David pulled off his thick jacket and approached slowly. "Can I put this around you? You're going to freeze to death out here." She nodded weakly, and when David draped the jacket over her shoulders, he noticed something. That made his stomach turn. There were bruises on her arms, dark marks that looked like fingerprints. Someone had hurt this woman. "What's your name?" David asked softly, crouching down so he wasn't towering over her. "Isabella," she whispered. "My name is Isabella." "Isabella, that's a beautiful name. Can you tell me what happened? How did you end up out here?" Fresh tears began to flow down Isabella's cheeks. "I ran," she said. "I had to run. He was going to. I couldn't let him." She couldn't finish the sentence, but David understood enough. David felt anger rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. This woman needed comfort, not more fear. "Who was going to hurt you, Isabella?" "My husband," she said, the word coming out like poison. "Well, he was supposed to be my husband. We got married this morning, but I didn't want to. My family, they made me." They owed him money, and this was how they paid it back. David's hands clenched into fists. In this day and age, he couldn't believe families still forced their daughters into marriage. But looking at Isabella's terrified face, he knew she was telling the truth. "I heard him talking to his friends after the ceremony," Isabella continued, her voice getting stronger as she talked. "He said he was going to teach me my place tonight, that I belonged to him now and he could do whatever he wanted. So when everyone was drinking and celebrating, I ran. I grabbed the car keys and drove as far as I could before the car ran out of gas. Then I just kept running through the woods." David looked around at the dark forest surrounding them. "How long have you been out here?" "Since this afternoon." "I got lost. I was so scared he would find me that I kept going deeper into the woods. Then I found this creek and followed it, hoping it would lead to a road or something. But it just kept going and going, and I got so tired. The moon was getting higher, and the temperature was dropping fast. David knew Isabella wouldn't survive the night out here, especially not in a wet wedding dress. "Isabella, listen to me," David said, looking directly into her eyes. "You can't stay out here. You'll freeze to death before morning. I have a warm house just up the path. You can get cleaned up, get some food, and we can figure out what to do next." Fear flickered across Isabella's face again. "How do I know you won't hurt me too?" David understood her fear completely. After what she had been through, trusting any man would be difficult. "You don't know," he said honestly. "But look around. You're in the middle of nowhere. It's getting colder by the minute, and you're exhausted. I'm offering you help, no strings attached. If you want to leave in the morning, you can leave. But right now, you need somewhere safe and warm." Isabella studied his face in the moonlight. Something in David's eyes must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. David helped Isabella to her feet, supporting her. Wait as they walked slowly up the path to his house. She stumbled several times, clearly running on empty. Her wedding dress caught on branches and tore even more, but she didn't seem to care. "Almost there," David encouraged as they climbed the small hill to his ranch. The lights of his house glowed warmly in the distance, promising safety and shelter. When they reached the front porch, David paused. "Isabella, I want you to know something. I have extra bedrooms, and each one has a lock on the inside of the door. You can lock yourself in if it makes you feel safer. I won't bother you. I won't try to come in. You have my word." Isabella looked at him with surprise. In her world, men took what they wanted. The idea of a man offering protection without expecting something in return was foreign to her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. David was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer. "Because everyone deserves to be safe," he finally said. "And because if my son was ever in trouble somewhere, I'd hope someone would help him too." As they stepped inside the warm house, Isabella felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who would help her without wanting to own her. Maybe there were still good people in the world, but even as warmth began to return to her body, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that her nightmare was far from over. Somewhere out there, dangerous people were looking for her, and she knew they wouldn't give up easily. The warm house felt like a dream to Isabella after hours in the cold. David led her to the living room, where a small fire crackled in the stone fireplace. The orange flames danced and cast gentle shadows on the wooden walls. For the first time in months, Isabella felt like she could breathe. "Sit here by the fire," David said, pointing to a comfortable chair. "I'll get you some dry clothes and make some hot tea." Isabella sank into the chair, pulling David's jacket tighter around her shoulders. The wedding dress clung to her skin. Cold and uncomfortable, she stared at the flames, trying to process everything that had happened. "This morning felt like a lifetime ago." David returned with a soft towel, a worn sweater, and a pair of sweatpants. "These might be too big, but they're clean and dry. The bathroom is right down the hall. Take your time." When Isabella came back, she looked completely different. Gone was the frightened bride in the torn wedding dress. Now she looked like a young woman who had been through something terrible but was starting to feel safe. The clothes were indeed too big, but they were warm and comfortable. David handed her a steaming mug of tea. "Drink this. It'll help warm you up from the inside." Isabella wrapped her hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep into her cold fingers. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know how to repay you for this." "You don't need to repay me for anything," David said, settling into the chair across from her. "But if you're comfortable talking about it, I'd like to understand what happened. Maybe I can help you figure out what to do next." Isabella took a sip of tea and closed her eyes for a moment. The warmth spread through her chest, and she felt strength returning to her body. Maybe it was time to tell someone the whole truth. "My family came to America from Mexico when I was 12, she began. "My parents worked so hard to build a life here. My father started a small construction business, and my mother cleaned houses. They saved every penny they could." David listened, quietly, not wanting to interrupt her story. 3 years ago, everything changed. My father got hurt on a job site. He couldn't work for months, and the medical bills were huge. We didn't have good insurance, and the money just disappeared. My mother had to work 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Isabella paused, staring into the fire. The memories were painful, but she knew David needed to understand. "That's when Vincent showed up," she continued. "He owned several businesses in town, some legal, some not so legal. He offered to help my father with the medical bills and even gave him work that he could do from home. My parents were so grateful. But there was a catch," David guessed out Isabella. Nodded. "Vincent didn't just want to help out of kindness. He wanted something in return. At first, it was just small favors. My father would store some boxes in our garage, or Vincent would have meetings at our house. My parents didn't ask questions because they were afraid of losing his help." She took another sip of tea before continuing. "The debt kept growing. Every month, Vincent would add more money to what we owed. Interest, fees, costs we didn't understand. My father tried to keep track, but Vincent controlled all the numbers. After 2 years, we owed him more money than my father could make in 10 years. David felt anger building in his chest again. He had seen this before, people taking advantage of families who were just trying to survive. "Last month, Vincent came to our house for dinner," Isabella said, her voice getting quieter. "He brought wine and flowers for my mother. He was being so nice, so charming. My parents thought maybe he was going to give us more time to pay back the money. But that's not what he wanted," David said. "No. After dinner, he sat down with my parents and told them there was a way to wipe out all the debt. He said he had been watching me, and he thought I was beautiful and smart. He wanted to marry me." Isabella's hands started shaking, and she set down the tea mug. My parents were shocked. They said I was too young, that I had dreams of going to college. But Vincent just smiled and said I could go to school after we were married. He said he would take good care of me. "What did you say?" David asked gently. "I said no, of course. I told him I didn't want to marry someone I barely knew, especially someone so much older than me. Vincent is 42, and I'm only 23. But he wasn't asking. He was telling." Isabella stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark forest. "Vincent gave my parents 1 week to decide. He said if they didn't agree, he would call in the debt immediately. He would take our house, my father's business, everything. He also said he had friends who could make life very difficult for us." David could see the pain in Isabella's posture. "Your parents were scared, terrified. My mother cried for 3 days straight. My father barely slept. They kept saying they were sorry, that they never meant for this to happen. But they also said they didn't see any other choice." Isabella turned back to face David. "I tried to run away before the wedding. I packed a bag and was going to take the bus to my cousin's house in California. But Vincent had people watching us. They brought me back home the same day." "So you went through with the wedding," David said. "I had to. Vincent made it clear that if I didn't show up, my family would pay the price. He said accidents could happen to people who didn't keep their promises. I couldn't let my parents get hurt because of me." Isabella sat back down, looking exhausted from telling her story. "The wedding was this morning at the courthouse. It was supposed to be small, just family. But Vincent invited his friends, and they all looked like the kind of men you cross the street to avoid. What changed your mind about running?" David asked. "After the ceremony, we went to a restaurant for lunch. Vincent was drinking with his friends, and they thought I couldn't hear them. But I was sitting right there when Vincent started talking about our wedding night. He said I needed to learn who was in charge now. He said I was his property, and he could do whatever he wanted with me." Isabella's voice started to shake again. His friends were laughing and making jokes about breaking in young wives. They talked about me like I was an animal they had bought. I knew if I went home with him that night, I might never get another chance to escape. "So you took the car and ran," David said. "I waited until they were all drunk and distracted. I grabbed Vincent's car keys from his jacket and walked out like I was going to the bathroom. I drove for about an hour before the car ran out of gas. I think Vincent was too drunk to notice I was gone at first, but by now he definitely knows." David looked at Isabella with new respect. She had risked everything to save herself, and she had done it alone. "Isabella, do you have any idea what Vincent might do to find you? He has connections everywhere. Police, government officials, business owners. He'll probably tell them I stole his car and ran away with his money. He'll make it sound like I'm the criminal." Just then, they heard something that made both of them freeze. In the distance, the sound of car engines was getting closer. David quickly turned off the lights and moved to the window. "Stay low," he whispered to Isabella. "We might have company." The sound of car engines grew louder as they approached David's property. Through the window, they could see headlights cutting through the darkness, moving slowly along the dirt road that led to the ranch. David's heart pounded as he counted. At least 3 vehicles. "Get away from the window," David whispered to Isabella, who was crouched beside him. "Go to the back bedroom and lock the door. If something happens to me, there's a phone in there. Call 911. I'm not leaving you, Isabella." Whispered back, "This is my fault. I brought this danger to your home." "None of this is your fault," David said firmly, but quietly. "You did what you had to do to survive." They watched as the cars stopped at the end of David's driveway. Men got out, and even in the darkness, they could see these weren't ordinary people. They moved with purpose, checking their surroundings like they had done this before. David's mind raced. His ranch was isolated, which usually felt peaceful but now felt dangerous. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles away, and the sheriff's office was 30 minutes down the mountain. If these men meant trouble, help wouldn't arrive in time. "We need to think fast," David whispered. "If they search this house and find you, what happens?" Isabella's face was pale in the moonlight. "Vincent will take me back, and he'll make sure I never try to run again. He might also hurt you for helping me." The men were walking up the driveway now, their flashlights sweeping back and forth. David could hear them talking in low voices, but couldn't make out the words. "There might be a way," David said suddenly, an idea forming in his mind. "But you'd have to trust me completely. What are you thinking?" Isabella asked. "In Colorado, married women have certain legal protections. If Vincent tries to claim you ran away or stole from him, being married to someone else could complicate things for him legally." Isabella stared at David in confusion. "But I'm already married to Vincent. That happened this morning." "Not if that marriage was forced," David explained quickly. "A marriage isn't legal if one person was threatened or coerced. But we'd need to prove that, and we'd need time." The footsteps were getting closer to the front porch. They could hear the men spreading out, probably surrounding the house. "What are you suggesting?" Isabella whispered. "I have a friend who's a retired judge. Judge Harrison lives about 10 minutes from here. If we could get to him, he could marry us tonight. It would give you legal protection and buy us time to figure out a real solution." Isabella's eyes widened. "You'd marry me? A complete stranger? To save your life?" "Yes," David said without hesitation. "It would just be on paper, just for protection. When this is all over and you're safe, we could get it annulled." A loud knock echoed through the house, making them both jump. A deep voice called out, "Anyone home?" "We're looking for a missing person." David looked at Isabella intently. "It's your choice. We can try to hide and hope they go away, or we can try to get to Judge Harrison's house. But we need to decide right." Now, Isabella thought about her options. Hiding felt like giving up, like waiting to be caught. But marrying David even just for protection, felt like taking control of her own life. "How will we get there without them seeing us?" she asked. "There's a back trail that leads through the woods to Harrison's property. It's dark and rough, but if we're careful, we can make it." Another knock, harder this time. "Sir, we know someone's home. There are fresh tire tracks in your driveway." David stood up slowly. "I'll go answer the door and try to stall them. You go out the back door and wait by the old oak tree. If this goes bad, don't wait for me. Follow the creek downstream for about a mile, then turn left at the big boulder. You'll see Harrison's house lights through the trees." "I'm not leaving without you," Isabella said firmly. The knocking stopped, and they heard the men talking outside. It sounded like they were planning to check around the house. "We go together or not at all," Isabella continued. "You've already done more for me than anyone ever has." "I won't let them hurt you because of me." David felt a warmth in his chest. This young woman had been through so much, but she still had the courage to stand up for what was right. "Okay," he said. "Together then, but we need to move now." They crept through the house to the back door. David grabbed a flashlight and his truck keys, then thought better of it. The truck would be too loud and easy to follow. They'd have to go on foot. The back door opened silently, and they slipped into the cool night air. The oak tree was about 50 yards from the house, across an open field. They would be exposed for those 50 yards, but it was their only option. "Stay low and move fast," David whispered. They ran across the field, expecting to hear shouts or see flashlights behind them at any moment. But they made it to the tree line without being spotted. From there, the trail wound through thick forest, rocky and uneven, but hidden from view. For 20 minutes, they climbed through the woods, using David's flashlight sparingly to avoid being seen. Isabella's borrowed clothes snagged on branches, and both of them stumbled several times on loose rocks. But they kept moving, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant getting caught. Finally, they saw lights ahead through the trees. Judge Harrison's house sat in a small clearing, warm and welcoming in the darkness. "William Harrison has been my friend for 30 years, David explained as they approached the house. "He married my parents, and he married me and my ex-wife. If anyone can help us, it's him." They knocked on the front door, and after a moment, it opened to reveal a tall, gray-haired man in a bathrobe. "David, what in the world are you doing here?" "At this hour?" Judge Harrison asked, then noticed Isabella. "And who's this young lady?" "William, I need your help," David said urgently. "This is Isabella, and she's in serious danger. I need you to marry us, tonight." Judge Harrison looked shocked. "David, what's going on? You can't just show up at midnight asking me to perform the wedding." "Please, let us come in, and I'll explain everything," David said, glancing nervously back at the dark forest dot once inside. David quickly told Judge Harrison about finding Isabella by the creek and learning about her forced marriage to Vincent. He explained about the men searching his property and why they needed legal protection immediately. Judge Harrison listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When David finished, the old judge was quiet for a long moment. "Isabella," he finally said, "do you understand what David is proposing? This will be a real marriage in the eyes of the law." "I understand," Isabella said, "and I know David is only doing this to help me. He's risking his own safety to protect someone he just met." Judge Harrison studied both of their faces. "And you, David? You're sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything," David replied. "This woman deserves to be free to make her own choices about her life." Judge Harrison nodded slowly. "Then let's make it official." 20 minutes later, by the light of Judge Harrison's living room lamps, David and Isabella became husband and wife. They had no rings, no fancy clothes, and no guests except for one retired judge. But as they said their vows, both of them felt like they were doing something important and right. When Judge Harrison pronounced them married, Isabella looked into David's eyes and saw something she had never experienced before. Here was a man who had given her freedom instead of trying to take it away. But even as they signed the marriage certificate, they all knew this was just the beginning. Vincent and his men were still out there, and they wouldn't give up easily. The first week after the wedding was the hardest. David and Isabella barely knew each other, yet they were now married and living under the same roof. The situation felt strange and awkward for both of them. David had given Isabella the guest bedroom at the far end of the house. He made sure she had her own key and even installed an extra lock on the inside of the door. Every morning, he would knock softly and wait for her to answer before even speaking. "Good morning, Isabella," he would say through the closed door. "I'm making breakfast if you're hungry. No pressure, though. I'll leave a plate for you in the kitchen." For the first few days, Isabella barely came out of her room. She was exhausted from months of stress and fear. David would find the food gone later, but he rarely saw her except for quick glimpses as she moved from her room to the bathroom dock on the fourth day. David was sitting on his front porch with his morning coffee when Isabella finally joined him. She looked better after several days of rest. The dark circles under her eyes were fading, and she seemed less jumpy. "Thank you," she said quietly, sitting in the chair next to his. "For everything. I know this whole situation is crazy." "You don't need to thank me," David replied. "I'm just glad you're safe." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun rise over the mountains. The view from David's ranch was beautiful. Rolling hills covered in pine trees stretched as far as they could see, and the morning mist made everything look magical. "It's so peaceful here," Isabella said. "I can see why you chose this place." "I bought this land after my divorce," David explained. "I needed somewhere quiet to think and heal. The city felt too crowded, too noisy. Out here, I can actually hear myself think." Isabella nodded. "I've never lived anywhere this quiet. Growing up, we always lived in apartments with thin walls. You could hear the neighbors arguing, babies crying, music playing. Sometimes I dreamed about having a place where I could just sit and listen to nothing but birds singing." That conversation was the beginning of something new between them. Over the following days, they started spending more time together. David showed Isabella around the property, explaining how he grew vegetables in his small garden and raised chickens for fresh eggs. "I've never seen a real farm before," Isabella admitted as they watched the chickens pecking around their coop. "My parents always lived in the city. They used to joke that they didn't know where their food came from." "It's not really a farm," David laughed. "More like a big garden with some chickens. But it gives me something to do with my hands, and the food tastes better when you grow it yourself." Isabella was fascinated by everything. She asked David to teach her how to collect eggs without scaring the chickens, how to tell which vegetables were ready to harvest, and how to preserve food for winter. David was happy to share his knowledge. It felt good to have someone who was genuinely interested in learning. As the days passed, they developed a routine. David would wake up early and do the morning chores while Isabella made breakfast. She turned out to be an excellent cook, making dishes her mother had taught her with fresh ingredients from David's garden. "These are the best eggs I've ever tasted," David said one morning, eating the breakfast Isabella had prepared. "That's because you know the chickens personally," Isabella joked, and David laughed. It was the first time he had heard her make a joke, and it felt like a breakthrough. In the evenings, they would sit by the fireplace and talk. Isabella told David about her dreams of going to college and maybe becoming a teacher. David shared stories about his work as a carpenter and how he had built most of the furniture in the house with his own hands. "You made all this?" Isabella asked, running her hand along the smooth wood of the coffee table. "Most of it," David said proudly. "It's satisfying to create something useful with your hands, something that will last." Isabella nodded thoughtfully. "I wish I knew how to make things. My parents always focused on survival, on just getting by. There wasn't time to learn hobbies or crafts." "I could teach you if you want," David offered. "I have tools in the workshop out back." We could start with something simple, like a small shelf or a jewelry box. Isabella's eyes lit up. Really? You would do that? Of course. Everyone should know how to create something beautiful. The workshop became Isabella's favorite place on the property. David was a patient teacher, showing her how to measure wood, use different tools safely, and sand the rough edges until they were smooth. Isabella had good hands for the work and picked up techniques quickly. Their first project together was a simple birdhouse. Isabella was so proud when they finished it that she insisted on painting it bright blue and hanging it outside the kitchen window where she could watch for birds to move in. Look, she said excitedly one morning, pointing out the window. There's a little bird checking out our house. David smiled at how she said our house and our project. Without realizing it, Isabella was starting to feel at home here. But not everything was easy. Isabella still had nightmares sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night crying or calling out. David would hear her through the walls, but never went to her room without being asked. Instead, he would make warm milk and leave it outside. Her door with a quiet note saying he was there if she needed to talk. One particularly bad night, Isabella knocked on David's bedroom door around 2 a.m. I'm sorry to wake you, she said, standing in the hallway in her pajamas and bare feet. I had another nightmare, and I just ... I don't want to be alone right now. Come on, David said gently, leading her to the living room. Let's make some tea and sit by the fire. They sat together on the couch, not talking much, just enjoying the warmth of the fire and each other's company. Isabella eventually fell asleep with her head on David's shoulder. He stayed awake all night, making sure she felt safe. After that night, Isabella began to trust David completely. She realized that he truly meant what he said about protecting her without expecting anything in return. He never tried to touch her inappropriately, never made her feel uncomfortable, and never made her feel like she owed him anything for his kindness. Why are you so nice to me? Isabella asked one day as they worked together in the garden. David thought for a moment before answering. Because everyone deserves kindness. And because you remind me that there's still good in the world, even after everything you've been through. Meanwhile, Vincent hadn't given up looking for Isabella. He had hired private investigators and even offered a reward for information about her whereabouts. But their marriage had created legal complications for him. He couldn't simply claim Isabella as his property anymore. Judge Harrison had been busy too, quietly filing paperwork that would make Vincent's forced marriage null and void. The evidence of coercion was clear, and the judge had connections in the legal system who were willing to help. Vincent is running into problems, Judge Harrison told David during one of his visits. Turns out several other families have come forward with similar stories about him. The authorities are starting to pay attention. David felt hopeful for the first time since this whole situation began. Maybe Isabella would finally be free to live her own life, but the best news came from Isabella herself. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from the front porch, she made an announcement. I've been thinking, she said. I want to go back to school. I want to study online and get my degree. Maybe I can't change what happened to me, but I can still build the future I always dreamed of. David smiled. I think that's a wonderful idea. You're one of the smartest people I've ever met. As the weeks turned into months, both David and Isabella began to realize that their marriage of convenience had become something more. They had become true partners, supporting each other through difficult times and celebrating small victories together. Neither of them was ready to admit it yet, but they were falling in love. Spring arrived early that year, painting the mountains in shades of green that Isabella had never seen before. She stood in the kitchen window, watching David work in the garden, preparing the soil for their first planting season together. 6 months had passed since that terrifying night by the creek, and everything had changed. Isabella was no longer the frightened woman in a torn wedding dress. She had enrolled in online college courses and was studying elementary education. Her dream of becoming a teacher was finally within reach. Every morning, She would spend 3 hours on her laptop, taking classes and completing assignments while David handled the morning chores. "How's school going?" David asked as he came inside, dirt still on his hands from planting tomato seeds. "Really well," Isabella said, closing her laptop with a smile. "I just finished my essay on child development. I never thought I'd be able to go to college, but here I am." David felt proud watching Isabella grow more confident each day. She had started driving his old pickup truck around the property and even gone to town a few times by herself. The first trip to the grocery store had been scary for her, but she came back feeling triumphant. "I bought everything on the list," she had announced that day, carrying bags into the kitchen like she had conquered the world. "And Mrs. Peterson at the store was so nice. She asked if I was David's wife, and when I said yes, she told me how lucky I was to have such a good man." That comment had made both of them blush and look away from each other. They still hadn't talked about what their relationship really was. Were they just friends helping each other? Were they becoming something more? Neither of them wanted to push the subject, but the feelings were definitely there. The legal situation with Vincent had finally been resolved. Judge Harrison and a team of lawyers had gathered enough evidence to prove that Isabella's first marriage was forced and therefore illegal. Vincent was now facing charges for human trafficking and fraud. Several other young women had come forward with similar stories, and Vincent's whole operation was crumbling. "You're completely free," Judge Harrison had told Isabella during his last visit. "Vincent can never bother you again. And if you want to annul your marriage to David, the paperwork is ready. You just need to sign it." Isabella had taken the papers but hadn't signed them yet. They sat in her drawer, waiting for a decision she wasn't ready to make. The moment everything changed came during a spring thunderstorm. David and Isabella were sitting in the living room, reading by the fireplace, when lightning struck nearby. The thunder was so loud it shook the entire house. Without thinking, Isabella reached for David's hand. He squeezed it gently, and neither of them let go. They sat there for the rest of the storm, holding hands and listening to the rain on the roof. "David," Isabella said softly when the storm had passed, "can I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found me that night?" David was quiet for a moment. "Every day," he admitted. "And it scares me to think about it. Not just because of what might have happened to you, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it now." Isabella turned to look at him, her dark eyes serious. "I feel the same way. You saved my life that night, but you've given me so much more than that. You've given me hope. You've shown me what it means to be treated with kindness and respect." "Isabella," David said, his voice gentle, "you know you're free to leave any time you want, right? I meant what I said about the marriage being just for protection. If you want to start your own life somewhere else, I'll understand." Isabella shook her head. "I don't want to go anywhere. This is my home now. You're my family. But I need to know something." "What's that? Are we ever going to talk about the fact that we're falling in love with each other?" David's heart stopped for a moment. There it was, the truth they had both been dancing around for months. "I didn't want to pressure you," David said honestly. "After everything you've been through, I thought the last thing you needed was another man telling you what to feel." "You're not just another man," Isabella said firmly. "You're the man who risked everything to save a stranger. You're the man who married me to keep me safe without asking for anything in return. You're the man who taught me to build things with my hands and believe in my dreams again." David felt tears forming in his eyes. "I love you, Isabella. I think I started falling in love with you that first night, watching you be so brave despite being so scared." "I love you too," Isabella whispered, "and I want to stay married to you. Not because I have to, but because I choose to." They kissed. For the first time that night, gentle and sweet, full of all the feelings they had been holding back for months. The next morning, Isabella threw away the annulment papers. When Judge Harrison called to check on them a week later, They told him together that they wanted to stay married. Well, the old judge chuckled over the phone. I performed a lot of weddings in my time, but I've never seen one that started as a legal protection and turned into true love. You two are special. A month later, they decided to have a real wedding ceremony. Not because they needed to, but because they wanted to celebrate their love properly. They invited their small circle of friends and held the ceremony in David's garden, surrounded by the vegetables and flowers they had planted together. Isabella wore a simple white dress that she had bought herself, with her own money from her part-time job at the local library. David wore his best suit and the biggest smile anyone had ever seen on his face. As they exchanged new vows, Isabella looked into David's eyes and saw her future. She saw children playing in the garden, family dinners around the wooden table David had built, and years of love and laughter ahead of them. I promise to choose you every day, Isabella said during her vows. Not because I have to, but because I want to. You showed me what love really looks like, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you the same. David's vows were simple but heartfelt. I promise to protect your dreams, support your goals, and love you exactly as you are. You brought light back into my life when I thought it would always be dark. After the ceremony, as they danced to music playing from an old radio in the garden, Isabella thought about how far she had come. A year ago, she had been trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Now, she was dancing with her husband under the stars, surrounded by people who cared about them. What are you thinking about? David asked as they swayed together. Hope, Isabella said. A year ago, I thought hope was just a word people used to make themselves feel better. But now I know it's real. Hope is what brought me to that creek. Hope is what made you decide to help me. And hope is what's going to carry us through whatever comes next. David spun her around gently, both of them laughing as her dress twirled. In the evening breeze, they had started as strangers brought together by desperate circumstances. But they had become partners, friends, and finally, true love. Isabella had found safety in David's arms, but more importantly, she had found herself. And David had discovered that sometimes the best things in life come when you're brave enough to help someone else find their way home. As the stars came out over their mountain home, David and Isabella knew that their real story was just beginning. They had learned that love isn't always about fairy tale romances or perfect circumstances. Sometimes it's about two broken people helping each other heal, building something beautiful together one day at a time. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, hope is enough to change everything.